This program is brought to you in part by National Life Group, a diversified family of financial service companies. By Vermont NEA, educators who believe great public schools are a basic right for every child. VTNEA.org. And by Small Planet Advertising and Design and OutOfDarkness.com.
That is going to wrap it up for us today. Have yourself a great rest of the day, and please come back and join us same time, same place tomorrow. This is FM 96.1 WDEV Warren, broadcasting from atop of Sugar Bush in Barrie. You can find us at 96.5 on your radio dial, and just about anywhere you can hear my voice. You can hear the flagship AM 550 WDEV Waterbury Montpelier, now in its 76th year of local operation.
No matter how much territory you cover, community radio is just that. Community, village, town, neighborhood. 4th of July, you want a parade. Don't have enough money for a band? We'll take care of that.
I mean, even little Moscow, Vermont, the marching band, what are they carrying? They're carrying boom boxes, playing music from WDEV. It's coordinated with them.
It's 10 a.m. here on the 4th of July as we celebrate America's 231st birthday. Vermonters have been gathering at parks and playgrounds across the Green Mountain State to take part in Independence Day parades. And as we've done for years, WDEV brings you the march music for parades from Berlin to Moscow and beyond.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we start the Independence Day celebration for July 4th of 2007, the Stars and Stripes Forever.
To me, why local radio is still important today is that people feel so disconnected from what's going on out there. There are so many things out there that seem so overwhelming. You know, we've got a war going on, we've got an economy, and I think that people really are looking for that connection to their local community. And when you have radio stations that are basically been turned into electronic jukeboxes so that the owners can squeeze another, maximize the amount of profit they can get out of it, that they really lose something.
Thursday, maybe you'll be listening to a little dinner jazz, and then it's out to Thunder Road for Dangerous Dave Moody and the stock car racing, and then a Red Sox game, or in the fall, back-to-back girls high school hockey. And when you wake up on Saturday morning, there's music to go to the dump by.
I think about this all the time. Where else would you go? Would you have something like music to go to the dump by?
Of course, you shouldn't end a sentence with a preposition, but it's a great show. Thousands of them now that Ken has done for so long. I think it's particularly interesting for a couple of reasons. First, because of its unique nature. I don't know where he gets those records, but they certainly don't get much circulation on any other station or show. And secondly, because Ken has become such a leader in the broadcasting industry. He's such a busy guy, working out of state as well as ownership of Radio Vermont, that for him to continue to do that program on a weekly basis is a tremendous tribute to his commitment to community radio.
honest to God, how many radio stations across the country have on Saturday morning the owner of the radio station behind a microphone with his co-host dog, and they're playing music to go to the dump by? I mean, I don't think it gets any more eclectic than that.
This is program number 2621, and the always exciting, thrilling, scintillating program that leans over the leading edge of social relevance. Music to go to the dump by. Things are difficult here on the program, folks. Having an executive producer that's a border collie, with a tongue that doesn't fit, with other parts that most border collies have that he seems to be lacking. It's time to deal with the issue that Buster the Wonder Dog has brought forward. Beneath his bed up on the farm, we discovered a magazine, and I'm not particularly tickled about it. Do you want to tell the audience this morning, Buster, what you're doing with the Doctors Foster and Smith Real Veterinarian Simple Promise since 1983 quality dog and cat catalog of products? Huh?
Music to go to the dump by is the last funny thing left on, truly funny thing left on radio that I can think of. Not sort of fake, Howard Stern, shock me funny, but really kind of silly funny in a great way.
Black smoke rising, darken in the day, 12 burning McDonald's. Have it your way. We will fight for bovine freedom.
Well, there it is, one of the great classics of music to go to the dump by, the famed Cows with Guns, and how appropriate that Farmer Dave has come into the Golden Studio here at WDEV.
The boys and girls in the engineering department over at Absorbing Junior College,
Oh, yes.
they have taken the bull/cow by the horn, so to speak, and they've developed a new use for fluid milk: automotive propulsion. That's right.
Automotive propulsion?
As you know, dumpsters, 100% of all the vehicles out there on the road are what we call lactose intolerant.
Mm-hmm.
But we at Absorbing Junior College are headed down the road less traveled with cutting-edge technology. Now imagine, if you will, Ken, pulling into a filling station and the pumps no longer say super, mid-grade, or regular. No, they read something like skim, 1%, 2%, or whole milk.
What is that again, please, that we sign up for?
Cows resolving automotive propulsion.
Oh, well, that's
Craft 101.
Yes. Now, where is this course being taught? I suppose this is in the Hey Diddle Diddle Space Center in Cow Barn over there. Is that right?
You got it. That's where it's taking place.
Yep.
Now, don't settle for less. Demand the best. Absorbing Junior College, where you can be outstanding in our fields.
Well, I really thank you for this enlightenment here and for your support of a great educational institution. We have more schools of higher education in Vermont than anywhere else, and Absorbing Junior College with its great Silly Boy yodeling team.
Welcome back. It's Friday, and that means it's time for Tom in Your Town.
Yeah, that's right. And this week, Tom is in Waterbury, Vermont. What's going on there, Tom?
Well, you guys, it's the 75th anniversary of WDEV radio, which is incredible. This thing has been in one family for almost the entire time, I believe, right?
Well, it's been part of the deal for 75 years, yeah.
That's incredible. Ken Squire, this is a face I'm sure you've seen many, many times, and a voice you've heard often, not only on radio, television as well. I see behind you, you've got kind of an interesting-looking vehicle. Is that like your mobile unit or something?
That's mobile unit number 1.
Mobile unit number 1. Now, it still is?
1931, Model A Ford, the year we went on the air. July 16th, 31.
You gotta be kidding me. You guys still using that?
Yeah, that's what we tell everybody.
Actually, Mobile Unit 1, the 31 Ford, now has a companion. In the 50s, the interstate opened up Vermont and changed the state forever. Unit 1's problem? Keeping up, maintaining minimum speed. So in the 90s, we jumped to the future, a beautiful, futuristic second-hand number in tune with the times. And the nice thing, it wouldn't rust. All plastic. Well, most of it anyway. But it had the look of the space shuttle. Critics, neighbors, said it looked like a vacuum cleaner. Called it the Dust Buster. So much for the price of progress.
Well, Harry Whitehill, he was the instigator. He had the weekly newspaper in this very building.
the Waterbury Record. He also had the Stowe Weekly paper. He got appointed by the government to be the collector of customs, and so it took him to St. Albans. And that's where the first commercial station was. And in 1930, he came back and told a young fellow that was working for him that he thought more people could hear than could read. Therefore, this radio might be an interesting business. That young fellow was my dad. Well, in 1930, people listened to radio on cat's whiskers. It took a lot of engineering to have a radio in your home, to get those signals from KDKA in Pittsburgh and WGY in Schenectady, New York, Boston, all over the United States, because there weren't that many stations on the air, and to skip from the signals, my goodness, you could listen even to stations as far away as Nashville. Harry decided that he'd give some of the Waterbury Record space to the radio station. It was a cubicle about the size of my office, a little smaller. And that was the broadcast facility for WDEV.
I was born in 1915 in Moortown, and I've been hanging around here for 91 years so far. I got a birthday coming up in June the 15th. Been in the valley here all my life. I was living in Warren there, and we didn't have any radio because didn't need one for anything special, couldn't get anything much. But after they came on, we got a battery set that worked pretty good. It had earphones, had to listen to it that way. I don't really recall just how it did start out, but it was a lot like electricity. When I moved to Warren, it didn't have any electricity up there at that time, and a lot of the folks didn't know whether they wanted to go to the expense of getting their house wired because they didn't know whether it was something that was going to last. And this station over here, WDEV, was, some folks had the same idea on it, but it kept growing and being real popular, and everybody liked it after a while.
When they finally got the deal on the air in 1931, there was no Federal Communications Commission, but there were some strictures about how that was done. One had to have a licensed engineer. So Lloyd Squire, my dad, he was to be the engineer. He couldn't engineer his way across the room. The examiner said, well, Waterbury, Vermont, never heard of it. Why don't I just give you a temporary license for 6 months and you come back and try again to get your real engineering license. So with that in hand, they set off on buying transmitters and a microphone. In fact, they bought 2 microphones. Then they got really busy putting all this stuff together, making all their plans for the broadcasting. It was pretty rigorous, you know, all that programming they were going to do and how they were going to get all these people on the air and make all these plans, because it wouldn't just be for a day, you know, it'd be continuous, of course, 1 hour a day. And after several months, toward the end of 1931, Harry Whitehill said to Lloyd Squire, you know, this may even work. Maybe we can hire an engineer. And they did. And Lloyd became an announcer.
But I can still recall, by gum, when folks who went to do their stint at regulating government just felt they had to do the job as quick as possible and bob right back and dig right in to do their share in sugaring. And once in 2 years was enough. But now the work there is to do, at far better pay from me and you, requires so much time and attention that House and Senate, the whole convention just needs a tonic for laws embryonic, and anyone is just sardonic to think the end will be even near in anything less than half a year. Now, Vermont has always had by nature a conservative farmer legislature.
We have this notion that small is provincial or local is provincial. And while WDEV is local, it's so far from provincial. I think it's terrific to listen to Dana Jewell or Eric Michael in the morning. And Mark Johnson is an extremely sophisticated, erudite interviewer who can hold his own with interviewers anywhere. He gets great guests, national guests, and he introduces them to Vermont on a local level, which is spectacular.
And that's no easy task, to do that day after day after day and keep it interesting.
Most talk shows in this day and age seem to really focus, they're either conservative or they're liberal. It's a conservative host interviewing conservative guests, talking to a conservative audience. Same thing on the liberal side. I view it a little bit differently. I think my job, and I have about as wide a variety of guests as you can have. I've had Colonel Oliver North on, and I've had Noam Chomsky on. I think that it's pretty far on the extremes of left and right. And I think it's great to have that mix, and I think the audience appreciates it. And what ultimately is the ultimate backstop is that you can pick up the telephone and call up and ask one of these guests a question if you think that they're veering too far one direction politically.
That's what a community is about. It's a place where you don't just do exactly what you want all the time, where you take some interest in things that are of interest to other people. So I can tell you a little bit about stock car racing, in Vermont, and who Jean-Paul Cyr is, and I can tell you a little bit about listening to the Green Mountain Club report and about listening to the Vast Trail report.
On July 16, 1931, WDEV opened its broadcasting day with a flourish. First speaker was the Honorable Harry C. Whitehill, founder of WDEV.
I never knew Harry Whitehill. He died the year I was born, 1935. But of all the things that entrepreneur did, the thing he seemed to take the most pride in happened in the last 6 years of his life. Harry Whitehill loved radio right from the beginning. He kind of thought this was the right thing to do, that it could really address his community. He felt very good about that. And he felt very good about bringing in his political cronies to be part of that first hour on the air, July 16th of 1931. Governor Weeks came up from Vergennes. Warren Austin was here, later to become the first ambassador from the United States to the United Nations. And I always thought that the thing that pleased Lloyd and Harry the most was a comment in that very first day of broadcasting by Warren Austin, who said, he thought that community radio was a great idea, local community radio, as opposed to the big radio stations in the far-off cities. He said here was something would serve the local people where you could sell an idea or a cow.
I was about 12 years old when my parents first got a radio. I was about 8 years old when I first heard and saw my first plane fly over. The radio was just as exciting as seeing that first plane. And it was a beautiful piece of furniture. It was different than they are today, and my parents, being French, listened to mostly Canadian stations, but for the news for the surrounding area and for places in Vermont, WDEV was their favorite station. And of course it was the children's, my brothers and sisters' favorite. And with us, when we were young, we did not refer to that station as WDEV. It was always Waterbury. Turn on Waterbury. Because I don't know why we didn't remember WDEV or why, but it was always Waterbury.
I can remember when I first came to Vermont almost 40 years ago, listening to somebody reading local poetry on WDEV, and I thought that was pretty cool. And that's kind of what the reputation is. It really is a community station, and I think people absorb it into their fiber and see it as something that is really local.
It is a family-owned community station that reflects the voices of one community, of Vermont. All of its political stripes, all of the different voices. It is essential to the functioning of a democratic society to provide that forum for people to debate and discuss the most important issues of the day, and to hear about what's going on in town, from the community calendar to what's going on at the local religious gathering to over at NASCAR.
Calendar is my 5-minute claim to fame. I do a party calendar feature in the morning and in the afternoon with Jack Donovan, and we basically run through the items that are going on during the course of the week, chicken pie suppers, school board meetings, and other various affairs in the communities.
Clear tonight and cool in the 20s, and tomorrow another nice day, upper 30s. Well, each year the high holy days in Vermont would be deer season, especially the opening day. And we make a big deal out of it here at WDEV with a live broadcast from the ABCD Deer Camp in Duxbury in the shadow of the Couching Lion. This year we had Rusty DeWeese, the logger.
Hey, you know, I got to sleep in this morning. I didn't get up till 4:15.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
You get up at 2:15 in the morning.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, usually. Yeah.
That's when I'm going to bed.
Most years, Governor Jim Douglas likes to come to Deer Camp because, well, he's just hooked on Chef Pierre, the camp cook's turnip fries, just part of the Saturday morning cuisine as we have breakfast and get things started in style for deer season.
Dana Jewell's irresponsible treatment of his guest on November 12, 2005 at the ABC hunting camp while live on WDEV's Honored Music to Go to the Dump By program casts an unwholesome image over Vermont hunters and hunting camps. This is the photo.
Well, I'm sorry, Governor. I didn't know this would get out.
Look at that.
Oh, no. Look at my hand.
Oh,
You're so tall, I can't even reach up there.
I think the fact is, if you look at DEV's past, if you look at the history, not just Ken at this radio station, since really he took over completely in 1979 when the old Squire passed on, the legacy that was left from the original founders, Harry Whitehill, Lloyd Squire, going back to 1931, what Ken has been determined to do. And me as the junior partner, you know, I'm the new kid on the block. I've been here for 20 years. I think we've worked together enough that I have a good sense of what we're trying to create for the future, to keep DEV, to keep all of our radio stations as relevant and as community-based as we possibly can. And it's a real effort to do that. I mean, we put in a lot of hours. I don't think you're going to find another radio station, maybe in the country, where the two primary owners are working actively on the air 6 days a week, year-round. And you will find that here.
Hey, oh wait, no, we have 6 and 7.
A lot of people called me up and said, you have to listen to the Trading Post because there's a snake for sale on the radio, or someone's trying to sell an iguana, do you want one? So I started listening to the Trading Post. I didn't want to buy any of the animals. People knew that I like reptiles and that I have snakes in my classroom, but I don't ever buy any animals. I just inherit them. And so it got me interested in what the Trading Post was and what was being sold on there. The other thing that is interesting about WDEV for me is that my husband has a 64 vintage VW Bug, and it's the only radio station that he can get, and it's the perfect radio station to listen to in that car because it just feels right.
On the Trading Post program, sponsored by Thurston's Floor Covering this half hour, I'm Eric Michaels, and producing for us this morning is hard-body Rich Haskell with the Patriot hat on.
Oh, it's a freebie. Hang it. No, Rich, I got it right here. Now listen to that sound. What an absolute... Oh, see, that's that one that Dana uses. I know, but it doesn't have the nice original patina from the farm. But this cowbell has been out there. It's really performed service in the field. You can tell.
Well, I think the perspective of my area and my neighbors is the most important thing about local media. I don't always agree with them, but I also really like to know how people are thinking. If we lose the local media perspective, we lose our unique qualities. We lose what's special and independent about people who live here, especially in Vermont. We lose the same thing I think that we lose if we lose town meeting, and that's our local voices and our unique, interesting perspectives.
In 1932, the station moved into its new building at Flush Hill in Waterbury and began regular extended daily broadcasting service at the 550 spot on your dial with a power output of 500 watts. From those Blush Hill studios came the new and more powerful voice of Vermont's mid-state station.
It was the first, I believe, construction of a building just for a radio station in those days. Of course, there weren't that many on the air, maybe 6 or 7 in Vermont. When it got on the air, it was an interesting setup. There was part of it that was all engineering, a lot of equipment and so forth. And then the other end was the programming and production end. And in the 30s, the programming, for the most part, was my dad reading the news usually out of the newspaper. But the entertainment part, the music part, was in one large studio. They had gone to Montpelier, Vermont, purchased a piano. They couldn't afford an orchestra, but they bought a small grand. They had a music director who played the piano and was the accompanist for singers, including my mother before she became Mrs. Squire. And there were two doors. You could walk in through one door and bring your band in, and the bands would be totally prepared, tuned up, ready to go. As they went in, there was a door on the far end of that room in which the band that had been performing would leave. And in the interim, they would read announcements for the Montpelier Clothespin Factory, the National Life Insurance Company of Vermont, and some of those other pioneers in sponsoring commercial radio. And Waterbury had a whole tenement house packed full with nothing but musicians that played on WDEV, all in separate groups, you understand, but it was quite a crowd.
One of the daily features of the station began just like this. Let it go, Z.
Here we are, the Pony Boys, on the air to bring you joy. Sing and play every day on your radio. Send your request, you like that, find us on your dial. Giddy up, giddy up, giddy up, whoa!
It's time for the Pony Boys. Howdy, everybody, and a very good evening to you all. Welcome to 15 minutes of fun and music around your radio with Don Fields and the famous Pony Boys. And here he comes right now, the man himself, Don Fields. Howdy, Don.
Don was primarily a really good violinist and fiddle player, and that caught my ear even as a little kid. And I knew when noon, I think his program was on like in the middle of the day, either noon or 1 o'clock, I can't remember. But as a kid, I knew exactly when it was time for it before I could ever tell time, and I'd go turn that radio on and listen to Fields.
They had a hall in Troy, and they used to play on Friday nights. Yeah. And my mother always took us to those dances. Back in 1933, my dad died, and my mother ran a farm by herself. The farm we lived on, we only had a road about 6 months out of the year. I remember when we first got our new power. That was a big deal. And we used to walk a mile and a half to school. In the wintertime, we had 2 pair of skis and 2 pair of snowshoes. 2 of us used the snowshoes and 2 used the skis, depending on which one got to them first. And we went to school that way. My mom bought us some guitars, and we had a neighbor that had a guitar, and he knew a little bit about chords, so he'd come over and he showed us the chords, and my mom showed me how to play chords on the piano. So we started from there. I played the chords, and Ross and Neil played the guitar, and Ross tried the violin, but he didn't make out very well with it. We used to get up early. We'd had to do the chores before we left. We had to come in the house and eat our breakfast and get cleaned up and be down to the station there. Hour and a half, 2 hour drive. We know the cars didn't go like they do today. The roads weren't the same. First time I think we were probably kind of nervous, but we got used to it. And the people down there were so nice to us that we weren't really scared. Anytime we went down, they put us on the air, because that was a program just for farmers in the morning. We didn't have no special dates. We just went down and they put us on the air. I'm not sure how we got the name, except we sent our milk to United Farmers for years and years and years. They might have named us down to the station there.
I think so. I think that's what we got in the station. They call us the United Farmers kids.
Yeah. The first time I played and sang, I did it by myself, and Mr. Squires said, "Oh my goodness, she's going to play her own guitar." I remember I won first prize once at an amateur hour, and I tried to get my brother here to sing with me, and he wouldn't, but he wanted half the prize, which he didn't get.
There's 2 trends going on in 21st century media right now. One is a trend towards consolidation, corporatization, commercialization, homogenization of the radio airwaves. Clear Channel is sort of the whipping boy for this. Before the 1996 Telecom Act, Clear Channel owned 40 stations nationally, and now with the lifting of ownership caps, Clear Channel owns something like 1,200 or more radio stations across the country. And what Clear Channel does when they buy radio stations is reprograms them towards specific corporate-friendly kinds of programming. So you hear the same 500 songs on the album-oriented rock station, for example, instead of the millions of songs that are out there.
I was one of only a tiny handful of members of Congress who voted against it. I didn't believe what they were saying. I disagreed with Senator McCain and others who thought this was a great idea. I said this is not going to bring about more competition. It's going to bring about less competition.
There are many, many, many communities in the United States of America that do not have local radio. And that means that people are not learning anything on the radio and maybe nowhere else about what their mayor is doing, what their city council is doing, their board of select persons, school board. They're not learning about what in fact is going on in their community. In fact, there was a famous case, I think in North Dakota, where there's a terrible train accident. And in fact, they tried to rouse the local radio stations and nobody was there because it was all pre-recorded stuff.
WDEV is an entirely different animal. It's a Vermont animal, and it's an organism, and it's got all the accents, it's got the local issues and the global issues, bringing out the voices, connecting the dots of communities, not just focusing on that small circle of pundits who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us that we get on the media conglomerates.
Yeah, and the last baby, I got 900. $1,399 value.
I think it's very, very important to maintain a sense of community, that people communicate with each other and interact in a variety of different ways. That may be at church suppers, at the annual town or school district meeting, maybe joining a local organization like the fire department, but it also means communicating through a medium like radio.
It's people who are experts in their own communities linking up, from Vermont to Iraq, from Venezuela to Washington State. I think people's voices that are authentic, that are speaking from their own experience in their own communities, that breaks the sound barrier in a way that no media conglomerate can do.
The other trend is a trend towards decentralization and diversity and small d democratic media, personified in radio by the low-power FM movement, micro radio, 100-watt stations that broadcast a whole bunch of different, very eclectic programming from a wide variety of people in the community. And what WDEV is doing, and I think quite successfully, is walking the line by trying to sort of marry those two perspectives in a unique and community-friendly way. WDEV is a commercial station. It is underwritten and paid for by local advertisers. But the key is those advertisers are local advertisers and are serving the community in Vermont.
Soul of the Red Sox nation is right here in the capital city of Montpelier, and the granite capital of the world, Waterbury, Vermont, and two good people from Main Street, right over there.
And then there is this trend towards decentralization and diversity in terms of all the many voices that you hear on WDEV and the many different kinds of programming you hear on a single day. And that's fairly unique right now in the world of radio. It's hard to find a local commercial radio station doing all of that and doing it successfully. And I think that's what makes WDEV kind of a nice model in terms of genuine community radio.
Ken Squire is one of the great characters that's ever inhabited the state of Vermont. Any one of the 3 or 4 things that he's done with his life would be more than enough for most people. His work as a businessman, his work as the kind of broadcast pioneer in car racing, and especially his kind of patronage, his sort of way he's kept WDEV doing what it does best. And of all the people who go on the air there, he may be the single finest natural radio guy there is. To listen to him pretend to fumble his way through the sports report is one of the better acts in all of broadcasting.
Hold on, here comes Mark Lamberton on the outside. He's on a roll. He is now up to 15th. So if he stayed there...
We joke an awful lot about our 9 o'clock staff meetings with Ken. Whether it's Ken's relationship with Jack on the air or even Ken's relationship with Buster on the air, or how Dana and I interact in the morning, it's a little bit of a daily soap opera. And I think Ken and I both have acknowledged that and appreciated that for a long time. People want to tune in. They want to be part of what's happening and feel like they're part of a family. And the guy that really has made all this happen from the beginning has been Ken. It goes back to the original music to go to the dump by back in the 60s. It was irreverent. It was kind of in your face. There was nothing like it back then. And there's certainly nothing like it again now. We brought that back as part of our 60th anniversary 15 years ago. It was supposed to be a 10-minute weekly feature, and then it went to 20 minutes, and then 40 minutes, and now it's over an hour long, and he still can't get it all done on Saturday mornings. And we wouldn't change a bit of it because it is so much fun. People enjoy the programming, and when we go on location, after 30 years of radio, I have to tell you, it is really something where the number one question I get asked wherever I show up is, where's Buster?
Oh, Buster the Wonder Dog? He's no promotion. He's the real thing. A genuine icon. He's an allegory on the radio station. A little scruffy around the edges, perhaps. But he's fairly intelligent, border collie. And he can bark and snap a little. But underneath it all, he has a good heart.
At 5 o'clock on weekdays, the sports show, when Ken and Jack are going back and forth. The first time I ever heard it, I thought that Ken was kind of a word I shouldn't say, maybe, because I thought he was really rude to his own employees. Then I realized what a nice little interchange it was and what a play it was, and how they were just doing it for show. And it was entertainment. It was very nice. I don't know if I should be embarrassed that it took me a while to realize that that's what it was or not. But now I really enjoy it. I look forward to it on the way home from work, listening to the background. And it's a good way for the employees to maybe give jabs at Ken, the kind of insults that you wouldn't normally be able to give to your employer, that it gives them a chance to do, which is a nice thing.
And I think we're one of the few stations during regular programming who will interrupt a music format and tell you about a lost collie on Winooski Avenue or somewhere around the area.
We put our sponsors on the radio live over the telephone. You don't do that. That's breaking all the rules.
A lot of stations have taken the easy way out, and they've cut their staff almost completely. And again, getting back to that morning team, they have a morning team, but that's it. It's all run out of a box and satellite delivered, so you may have 2 or 3 people involved with a radio station as opposed to our staff here, which is probably anywhere from 25 to 30 when you add it all up.
You're called upon to answer all sorts of questions that may have nothing to do with the radio. We get questions about events that we're not even promoting or advertising on the air just because people know we'll have the information.
The Vermont Philharmonic proudly announces its 2006-2007 musical season.
Radio changed, which is one of the reasons that I was leaving station to station. They would go automated. There was no sense of community anymore. It was one of these things where you went in and a computer could do your job. You voice track stuff, you put it in the box, as it's called.
I can take some breaths out and stuff like that and edit it.
Here is the first place that I've ever worked that is involved in the community. PSAs are just as important as commercials. Commercials are paid, PSAs are not. That's rare to find something like that. They encourage people to come in to talk about it. They do everything they can to let them know about local sports, local news, anything local, and they care.
And now in this state, most of the other radio stations are nothing but a satellite dish and a sales staff. This is the last place that has people talking to each other behind a microphone, and I love to be a part of that.
My dad had a partner that Harry Whitehill thought a great deal of, a young man named Bill Ricker. My dad was his senior by 12, 14 years, and when World War II came along, Bill signed up, ended up in Germany, and was killed there. My father, who was an only child, looked upon Bill as his brother, and they couldn't find him. It was several years after World War II before Bill came home. And it was very hard for my dad. It was such a tragedy for this radio station. Bill Ricker had made a real difference. I'll tell you one of the great differences he made. 1938, Bill and Lloyd had built that 430-plus foot four-legged tower to better serve the area. It had been up 2 months when the hurricane of 1938 came up the Connecticut River, dropped the tower right over to the golf course. And my father was devastated. He had never come from any money, and everything that they had in the world they had pitched into getting that gigantic tower put up. And my father was standing in the field, according to other sources later on, and turned to Bill almost in tears and said, "Bill, I don't know what we're going to do." And Bill said, "Lloyd, neither do I. And you know, that damn hurricane blew off my back porch, too." Sweetened things up. They went along. They got it rebuilt. They got that thing back in record time, and DEV stayed on the air. I guess you could say I owe everything in my life to radio. In the early days of this radio station, communities would have a whole hour. They would come in and bring choirs and poets and stories. At one time they had the Hardwick Hour, and a gal named Guyla Rowell came down here to be on the radio and sing a song. And my father became quite interested in Guyla, and that lady was my mother.
Question here until I'm told we're out of time. The biggest difference between you and your opponent, Senator Welch?
Well, it's really quite clear. I think it's how we assess what the choices that you have to make. I believe that the basic
I came from a station where you weren't supposed to talk about where you were located because the larger audience didn't want to know you were in Montpelier. They didn't want to know the temperature. They didn't want to, you were supposed to be as generic as possible.
Looking at it from a fresh view is what we need.
Thank you all for coming.
The responses we get from going out in public, meeting people, it's really amazing. Radio is a really intimate medium. It's basically someone talking in your ear, and it doesn't get more intimate than that.
Thanks everybody for coming. We'll be broadcasting live all day today. Ken Squire will be here, and Eric Michaels and the whole crew, so thanks for coming by.
Whether it's commercial or public, media companies are using the public airwaves. They have a responsibility to bring out the full diversity of opinion. That, I think, is what WDEV does. That is what public radio at its best can do, public television, community media all over. The hope is that when people learn about it, they want to do something about it.
When the FCC creates legislation that makes it possible for one large multinational corporation to own as many as 8 radio stations in any given market, which is a community to the rest of us, that really creates some pretty significant challenges in terms of diversity, small d democracy, and the radio airwaves. And I think the solution to that has to be creating genuine community radio that is commercial in nature, because commerce, of course, is a part of any community, but also really honors and provides a whole range of perspectives and programming that really does reflect the larger community of which that station is a part.
Democracy Now! Broadcasts on over 500 radio and television stations around the country, on Pacifica stations, NPR stations, low-power FM stations, college and community stations, and WDEV here in Vermont. It is unusual, but what Democracy Now! Cares about, this independent, unembedded, grassroots global news hour, is independence, is community base, and that's what WDEV is all about.
I happen to believe that as much diversity of opinion as we can engender in this country is the right thing. I do not want to see a few large corporations controlling what the American people see, hear, and read, whether it is radio, television, or newspapers. And in fact, that is the trend in which we are moving, and I think that's a very bad trend. It is especially apparent in radio, and that's why a station like WDEV, which is locally owned, which involves local people, which deals with local issues, is just a breath of fresh air.
With 5% of the precincts reporting, it's the GOP incumbent Brian Doobie with 56%, Matt Dunn, the Democrat, with 41%. You're listening to live election night coverage. It's 9 o'clock, and time for the latest news and updates from the Associated Press.
53, 34, 67, 20, okay?
Well, it's election night, and of course here at Radio Vermont, as it does every couple of years, that means all hands on deck. We have absolutely every employee that has anything to do with this radio organization on deck tonight. Some people are taking the phone calls from the town clerks. Some of us are on air. I've got my little walkie-talkie here, and I'm talking with Eric Michaels, who is on the air live, and he's got a little earbud. So when I tell him we're going to send it to somebody with an update on Morrisville or Johnson or Waitsfield or wherever, he's ready for it and he hears it. The whole thing's live. It's mayhem, but it's great fun.
I am updating the results from the town of Linden. That's what I'm doing right now. It's fascinating.
Live election coverage here on WDEV FM and AM continues. I'm Eric Michaels, along with our news director, Rich Haskell. Our statewide desk reporter this evening is Mark Johnson, and watching the national picture is our own Ken Squire. Lee Cattell is your producer, Charlotte Strasser, Jack Donovan, Roland LaJoy, Kaya Como.
I came into this place, and it was part 1979 all over again, and it was part museum. It goes even further back than that. I mean, I couldn't believe it was like a giant time capsule walking in here. There's thousands and thousands of albums downstairs. The equipment is very much from the 70s and 80s, but this is the kind of place that just says, let's make it work. Here's the equipment we have, fix it when we need to, get everything on the air, get it done correctly and quickly and accurately, and move on to the next thing. It's really like walking into a museum that still works, a living museum.
Stifling defense, and it is going to be a tall order for Mount Abe tonight. As the Eagles pick up the first possession off the jump ball, they'll be going right to left in the maroon and white road jerseys. Comes down on the rebound is Jipner on the elbows underneath. Full court pressure still being applied by Virgins. Eagles break it, and Brown into forecourt at a 1-on-4, and she smartly pulls it back.
Come on, Juan.
Rusty Parker, from the time he was 12 years old, was in this radio station. His folks sent him off to Columbia. He lasted one semester and said, I really appreciate the opportunity, but I want to be in the radio business, and I want to work at the radio station. And home he came, and here he stayed.
And Rusty, speaking of longevity, how many times have I heard you open your program? You must have done that about 6,000 times.
You mean it's tip-top time? I imagine I've read several thousand chicken pie supper notices on Tip-Top Time, Harold, but of course, one of the most important aspects...
He died on the air. Died reading the news one morning shortly before 8 o'clock. He was 52 or 53. Went through about 3 packs of Chesterfields a day.
And the newswoman, I could hear her suddenly start screaming and crying as she ran across the hall. So I ran down the hall and into the studio, and there was Rusty collapsed over the console in the control room. And the microphone was still on. So I turned around to the news director and said to her, her name was Amy, I can't remember her last name, but anyway, I told Amy, call the ambulance. Well, the microphone was on, and that went out over the air. So I reached in and picked up Rusty and kind of pulled him out of the studio so that we'd have room to be able to lay him down on the floor and be able to do something. And I didn't know CPR. By the time we got him out into the hallway and on the floor, a fellow appeared at the top of the stairs, and I turned to him and I said, do you know CPR? And he says, yes, I'm a doctor. His name was Dr. Valentine. And he happened to be driving by the station at the time that Rusty collapsed and heard on the air, heard what happened, and put 2 and 2 together and figured out what was going on, because Rusty did have a history of heart problems. So Dr. Valentine told me to work on Rusty's chest while he did mouth-to-mouth, and we kept Rusty alive long enough for the ambulance crew, who also heard it on the air, to arrive. And then when they arrived, they took over and transported him to the hospital. And I got up and went back into the studio and finished the newscast that Rusty was in the middle of at the time.
From 1 o'clock to 5 in Rusty Parker Park, that's down Main Street here, they're going to have an ice cream social, this put on by the radio station.
I've been so fortunate that so many good people came along that were as committed to radio as was my dad, as was Harry Whitehill and Bill Ricker. It gave me the opportunity to follow some other paths, which I had to do. One involved motorsports, which I learned to love real early, thanks to my dad.
To introduce the starting lineup for the Sylvania 300, it is again our great pleasure to welcome a New England racing icon, the father of modern motorsports television, longtime voice of the Daytona 500, Mr. Ken Squire.
Thank you. What a beautiful day for a race. And after 26 races, we're down to it.
And that led me into the world of television and got me out of Vermont for a few years to travel with CBS and ABC and several other organizations, and loved every minute of it.
And they're never better anywhere than on this 1 mile facility. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a race.
But I couldn't ever be away. I always claimed this country is my home, and this is the heartbeat for me, radio.
When I was about 6 years old, I decided that radio was going to be my life. So I set up a little mock studio in my house, and I had a picture of the late, great Rusty Parker on the wall, and I had 2 record players, and I had an old wire recorder. It was that long ago. This was probably in the early 50s. And I did that in my house, and I grew up next door to Rusty Parker, and Ken Squire had been a friend from the beginning of time. So I eventually worked my way into a job at WDEV, and I basically haven't left. I've done a lot of other things in the interim, but I still come back here now on a daily basis. We went from 1,000 watts daytime to 5,000 watts daytime, and that really, at the time we did it, put us on the map, because you understand this is before FM radio existed in Vermont. So it was all AM, and it really gave us a reach, a much broader reach than we had had previously.
We had added 1,200 square feet to our transmitter building, installed the latest control equipment, added modern equipment for ventilating the high-powered transmitter.
And now, here is Mr. Lloyd E. Squire, owner of radio station WDEV.
We will, with every means at our disposal, continue to serve in a manner that will deserve your respect and loyalty, without which this new service, or in fact this entire radio station, would not have been possible.
Small-town, community-based radio has largely disappeared from our state. Many stations around Vermont used to have full-time news directors. They used to carry a lot of local programming. They would cover the selectmen and school board meetings and report on them the next morning during drive-time shows. But that doesn't happen much anymore. There are just a few left in Vermont, and WDEV is not only one of them, but really the premier station in terms of local coverage. It's important to maintain that connection to the community, I think. Not only for purposes of news and information, but really to maintain a sense of community.
When you're on the radio, you're talking to one person, either in their car or in their parlor or in their living room or their bathroom for that matter. It's very, very powerful, and it's so much more than just playing music and being a jukebox, which many of the radio stations are these days. We take pride in the fact that we sort of break every rule in the modern broadcast book, and we've been doing it for years. Some of the other radio stations, they look at us and they find us amusing, I think, sometimes, but we're very proud of the fact that we're still doing what radio, I think, was meant to be for, and that is communicating and serving the community and doing some real good.
People in Vermont want sophistication from their books, and they want sophistication from their radio stations. So a radio station like WDEV, if it's going to thrive and survive and give its listeners what it wants, it's going to have to be sophisticated. That's why people like Mark Johnson thrive on it, and that's why people tune it in the morning, because they know that Mark is going to ask smart questions of interesting people, and it's going to be every bit as hip and as challenging and as erudite as radio out of San Francisco or Chicago.
Oh, I think WDEV's holding in there real good. I think they got some good help there, and I think that they're doing real well as far as I'm concerned with their programs and what they do.
Now, I've been one who, through the years, has been inclined somewhat to fears that thoughts of mine, of use to me, might not of real necessity be what my neighbors, friends, and such would cotton to so very much, although for free. But in this chain reactance age, it seems one needn't be a sage to start a little thought some night, which gets to shining pretty bright, in spite of how it first appeared, and how folks doubted, how they feared it does all right.
One of the great things about WDEV is that it's so, in a sense, ordinary and daily and has been going for so long and things, that people, I think, don't recognize just how unique and in a sense spectacular it really is, and how unlikely it is that it's survived. There's, you know, nothing else like it left in the wild, you know. And as a good environmentalist, I'm very hopeful we can figure out ways to protect it for a long time. Protect it, but not tame it.
All right, thanks, Tom. That is quite a radio station.
Really is quite the story.
Here we are, Pony Boys on the air, we're bringing joy, sing and play every day.
Additional funding for this program was provided by Chittenden Bank, by Waitsfield and Champlain Valley Telecom, and by Central Vermont Medical Center.
Oh, stop. I've asked you not to do that. Buster the Wonder Dog.